Hey, comics cubers. In September, Komiket from the Philippines organized the Philippine International Comics Festival, an online festival which will be live next year, but an online festival which included interviews with writers, artists, and various people from the comics community around the world. This December, I will be uploading the 3 interviews that I did on every Monday of the month. This third interview is with someone that the Comics Cube has never had on as a guest before, so this is a first. The legendary writer and inker, Mr. Jimmy Palmiotti.
Hey, welcome, guys. And I'm so excited to be here. It's great to be with you guys.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jimmy. It's a great pleasure to have you on the Philippine International Comics Festival. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Please leave your questions in the Q&A. We will get to them. Okay. Mr. Jimmy Palmiotti, welcome to the Philippines, kind of.
It's as close as I can get right now, but yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I think you should know that the Philippines has a very, very strong 90s fandom for comics. Like, it really exploded fandom-wise in the 90s. So your name is pretty well known in the fan circles here in the Philippines. Of course, it is well known in the fan circles in general, but I just wanted to let you know that.
That's pretty cool. I mean, it's been a while since the 90s, but I still work on a lot of the books, characters that Joe Quesada and I created in the 90s, like Ash and Painkiller Jane, and then when we did Marvel Knights, they just came out with another book. It's like the 25th anniversary of Marvel Knights this year, so time flies.
And there's a huge fondness for it because we keep going back to things like that. Of course, yeah. I first discovered you as an inker, and I would like in the course of this interview to get to all of the different hats that you wear. So let's start with inking. I think there is a misconception among fans and non-creators about what an inker does. Would you like to give us a briefer on the inking process?
Sure. You know, so the inking part of the art process was created to get the books out quicker. So a penciler would get a script and he would sketch out what he wanted to draw, and he would hand it over to an inker who would go in with pen and ink and finish the drawing and then hand that over to a colorist. So it's like a production line, part of a production line. And the better inkers were able to over time create a style. So a lot of pencilers would ask for specific inkers. And this is basically a job where I used a pen and ink and a brush and, pretty much just went in and tightened pencils up. So sometimes the artist would be loose, sometimes they'd be tight. If they're trying to make a deadline, very loose. And it was up to me to go in there and tighten it all up and bring it together.
Of course, the penciler that you're best known for inking over is Joe Quesada. What do you think it is about the combination of the two of you that was just magical?
I think like Joe's work is very powerful and dynamic and also complicated. And my job was to kind of separate the two. Like a lot of stuff when we did Daredevil or Ash, we wanted the work to look like it was jumping off the page. And Joe's work is sort of like a pencil line is kind of like a dead line. It's just a kind of simply drawn line. And I would go in and with a brush and ink and make it more dynamic, thicken out the body and the face. And sometimes it's just we got along as friends, and then we started working together, and it all came together, over time. But my job is to complement the penciler and not lose the look of the penciler, and he was very happy with the work I did.
That's interesting to me because the whole combination of penciler and inker is very interesting to me because technically speaking, the final art that the reader sees is actually the inker's art, isn't it?
It is, and then it's the colorist's art, right? Because the colorist goes in and adds it. But it is. I mean, you'll see, a lot of books now, when I was started out as an inker, none of the pencils were ever scanned and printed. But now, with technology over the past 20, 30 years, the pencilers tighten it up, they scan it, and then they digitally ink it. You know, they'll go in digitally. So the process has changed over time. There's still people inking, but not as much anymore. It's more like the artists with being able to use something like an iPad and Procreate or Photoshop. They've actually cut out some of the middlemen, which are the inkers, and they go right from pencils to finishes.
Do you think anything has been lost in that process? Like, let's say, just texture, for example, or just everything? Because I think to me, everything looks so much cleaner now, quote unquote.
Yeah. You know, it's because we're using brushes. I mean, brushes leave a texture, and we use crow quills, which is a different kind of pen. It's like a dipping pen. So there's textures that you don't see that much anymore in the work. And you know, certain inkers understood that wood should feel like wood, metal should feel like metal. But a lot of the art now, everything has the same line. So it depends on the colorist to kind of define what it is. But back then, the inker was actually more in charge of that back then.
You talked about the job of the inker being to preserve the way it would look, if the pencils were reproduced.
Right.
So this is the Philippine International Comics Festival. So I got to ask you about somebody like Alfredo Alcala inking over John Buscema, which is infamous and famous because one, it looks great, but two,
Yeah.
John Buscema hated it. So
Well, maybe John hated it, but the fans loved it. I used to look at Alfredo's work and go, "Oh my God!" Like it's like magic what he did, you know. And it was the interesting part of inkers because you could have John Buscema done by Tom Palmer or somebody else, looks completely different. But Alfredo, you know, was a true artist. I mean, he went in there, his brush, he had like a magic brush. I don't know how to explain it, but he went in and did stuff that nobody else could. And that's why when you get original art, like the pages inked by Alfredo are a lot more money to buy, because I think people like me just really appreciated what he did. And he went in and brought life to John's stuff that, you know, it just wasn't there before. It's not that John couldn't do it. It's just that Alfredo, you know, with that brush, I mean, it was like water. It was this flowy line, and it was, you know, his inks made everything look like it was from another era. You know, it's just nobody's ever been able to do what Alfredo's done since, and that's where like an inker like Alfredo is irreplaceable. He's a one of a kind artist. Just as a kid, I bought everything he ever did. So, you know, I was a huge fan.
which artists did you study regarding inking?
Well, Alfredo was one of them. Another one was Klaus Janson, who I was a fan of. And then classics like Frank Frazetta, Al Williamson, Jack Davis, anybody that had a line that was interesting to me and unique. Frank Frazetta had sort of like what Alfredo had in a way. He had a very flowing line, and where Al Williamson had a very photogenic line. He was able to do things with a nib and a pen that other guys couldn't do. So I was always attracted to the uniqueness of each artist. Alex Toth was another person that wasn't interested mainly in the tools of the trade, but he had a way of blocking in his blacks that looked like nobody else. So I trained with those guys. I trained, you know, when like any other kid, I used to blow up the comic pages and stick tracing paper over it and try to copy it with a brush to see how I could do it. You know, eventually I started learning, and when I was working up at Marvel, I had people like John Romita Sr., who would be over my shoulder and showing me how to do things, and Al Williamson as well would help me a lot. So I was just lucky, but those are some of the guys that influenced me.
When you're talking about that kind of mentorship back then, and now I'm assuming everyone works remotely, do you think that's maybe missing from today's generation?
It absolutely is, because you know as well as I do, when you're in a group of people, you learn things, right? People know things you don't. You're part of a group. You get to watch people work. It's just not the same watching a video of somebody do it. You know, it's when you see it in front of you. I remember when I was a kid, I went to a gallery where Bernie Wrightson was there, and he's a fantastic fantasy artist. And he was sitting there, and I got to ask him questions, what tools he used, and he pulled out his brushes and he was showing me how to hold the brush and how to roll it when you have ink on it. And this is Bernie Wrightson teaching this 16-year-old kid how to do it, you know. And you can't get that if you're staying home all the time. It just doesn't, you know. We learn now. It's like the YouTube culture, or we learn from videos. But I think having somebody in front of you and seeing them doing it, seeing how they do it, it's just an experience. It's like a mentorship. You know, you can learn how to fix something watching a video, but if you're actually with the person doing it, you're going to have another 30 questions that you can ask. So I think it's a different experience.
So would you advocate for the creators and aspiring creators in our audience right now? Would you advocate, for example, still actively seeking out a mentor in the physical sense?
I mean, you know, so a lot of people here, they go to schools and teachers are the mentors, you know, and showing them how to do it. If there's a possibility of working with another artist, it's great to do, you know. Don't expect much pay, but expect to learn a lot real quick, you know. I would always suggest that for any skill is to apprentice with somebody. I can't even, if you fix air conditioners, I would say go out with the guys that fix air conditioners and watch them work. It's like any skill. When you see people doing it, it's completely different experience. And I think we learn better with hands-on than we do just visually. Now you can do a lot of things visually. I taught myself how to color using videos on Procreate on YouTube, you know, and I did it, but I still had it in my head how I wanted to see things. So there's the tool, and then there's knowing how to apply the art to the tool. You know, it's two separate things.
Speaking of that, we have a question from Wincy Ong, which is, what a great segue. What is your opinion on Procreate, Apple Pencil, and the iPad Pro? Is the work faster now because you can pencil and ink at the same time on a digital tablet? And are you a fan of colored line work, meaning selecting black line art and giving it color? It's something that couldn't be done with the technology in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the 70s and 80s, we had to have the colorist right next to us to say, hey, can you make this outline around my face flesh color, like a darker color, instead of just a black line? And it wasn't done that much. So I'm a big fan of any technology that gives an artist more freedom to express themselves. So with Procreate, I love the program. It's great for coloring, penciling, inking. It's fast. My wife and I, when we travel, we can't do much work, but if they need a piece or they need something quick, we'll go on the iPad and do it the best we can. I prefer to have the original art in front of me. There's something about, you know, having a piece of art that is just, you know, you can hold it and you can mess with it. But the technology does allow a lot of freedom, and it allows you to do things. Again, the artist's brain sees things differently. Even the logo for your for the comics festival, the outlines are all different colors and everything. And it used to take a long time to do that, and now you can just hit a button and you just do it. So I still think it's like it's the artist's brain that's important. It's just new tools that we're learning, and I think any tool that can get what's in your brain onto a paper or a screen to somebody else is a great thing. It's just, but you have to have it up here first.
I suppose the most logical next question for that would be, what do you think of AI?
So AI is another tool, right? It's, you know, some people are going to learn how to use that tool brilliantly. Other people are going to mess with it and then give it up after a week or two. And, you know, so it will take the place of a lot of things down the line. And it will get better as it goes, like every technology does. There's people that are brilliant. They grab onto the technology and do things. I don't see it as a threat for what we do for comics, because I think the stars in comics are the ones that have individual looks and the way they do the storytelling, and, you know, the people we know the names of, you know. You can't get an Alfredo Alcala or an AI, but you can dump all his work and it could look like him, but it's not going to be him. So I don't see it as a threat as much as I see it as another tool. Um, but you know, AI is being used for 1,000 different jobs already. You know, our phones already. You know, this computer, this thing right here, we're in front of, has so many parts of AI working for it. Um, as far as comics and storytelling, again, it's another tool to get your story down. I have the issues that the actors and the writers have is, you know, copying people, or, you know, we're going to create celebrities with it and stuff like that. I don't know over time how much is going to be invested in a lot of that, but it seems like the people that are greedy like to grab onto it, technology right away, and figure out how to get rid of jobs.
Yeah.
So I don't know if, you know, I think all over the world greed is consistent and it usually destroys things. I'm not a big fan of greed, to be honest. So sure, greedy people are going to use AI to make money and to get rid of people's jobs. Creative people are going to use AI as a tool, and they're going to master the tool, and they're going to do some amazing work with it.
Yeah, I think I've read that if you're the type of person who will just use AI and like not make changes to it, on
Right.
giving your human input, then it's just not going to be good.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the AI work and I go, oh, fix that finger, or that leg is a little weird, or the dimension is a little off. You know, I, I don't use it personally. I played around with it, but honestly, I have, you know, I'm writing all the time. So, and I don't need it as a writing tool because this thing clogging my head has plenty in it that I don't need to go elsewhere for any information. But you know, I over time, people are going to use it for certain things. You know, it's for the future to tell us, really.
The last question about inking, again from Wincy Ong, is any advice on correct posture when drawing on the iPad? Do you still sit down and use an architect's tilt table, or do you draw now on the couch while curving your backbone?
I don't draw on a couch. I sit upright. I when I went to school, if I slouched, the teacher would hit us with a ruler. So I sit perfectly upright. And so when I have the iPad in front of me, I usually put it on a tilt. It's on a holder, like a 45-degree type. So I kind of work on it on a little bit of a slant, like I would a drawing board.
Of course, of course, you co-created with Joe Quesada, Ash, and Painkiller Jane. You guys started up Event Comics. That was a time of the creator-owned comics were like really booming back then. Um, and of course now with Kickstarter and everything, it's
Right.
I don't know, is it easier to make creator-owned comics? I'm not sure, but like,
Well, it's
can you talk about that time and compare it to today?
sure. I mean, so back then there was no crowdfunding, right? There was Marvel, DC, Image, which was coming up, and a couple of other companies like Dark Horse and IDW and stuff like that. But you know, doing comics back then, the companies owned everything, so we did a ton of work where other people owned it. We never benefited from it. They made movies, they made TV shows. We never got a dime from it. Okay, and if we did, it was a couple of bucks to keep us quiet. So when the Image guys got together, they kind of left Marvel and DC, created their own books, owned their properties, and Image started publishing, and it was a great thing for everybody. Over the years, DC and Marvel, which are the big ones in America, you know, we're talking Superman, X-Men, you know, all the whole Marvel universe. They are corporate comics. They're comic books owned by corporations that over the years have gotten lucky to get some really good creative people to work for them. But at the end of the day, both Marvel and DC, which are Disney and Warner Brothers, are basically corporations that own characters. And for creators like me, you can work your whole life for them. And the minute you get sick, there's no medical coverage, there's no royalties. They don't care when you're old enough and you have to slow down. They don't look after the people. So we started seeing that these companies really don't care for us. And the only place we're going to be able to exist is to create our own characters and own them. And that's what the last 20 years have been about. Create your own comics, doing your own thing. And then when crowdfunding came along, like Indiegogo or Kickstarter, creators like me can go out and directly sell to the audience, and that changed the whole business.
Is that better for you?
Much better. Yeah. At the time when I was, let's say, peak DC Comics, Amanda and I were doing Harley Quinn every month, and it was the best selling. It was the #1 book in the United States. I still make more doing 3 Kickstarters a year than I do doing 25 books a year for Marvel or DC. So
Incredible.
it is much better because my audience, I sell directly to my audience, and my audience wants me to do comics the way I see it. So my books are adult, they're better printing, they're bigger, they're beautiful colors, and I hire top creators to work for me, and I have no editorial. They can't tell me you can't do that. Everything I do in my books, I can do whatever I want. And the people that buy them love that because they know they're getting the pure brain from me. And whatever artist I'm working with is doing the best work they've ever done. So it's much better.
I've long held the thought, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this theory, but I think when people talk about Marvel and DC being comic book companies, my gut reaction is always like, no, IDW is a comic book company. Marvel and DC are IP companies that have comic book divisions.
Well, IDW is a licensed comic company.
That's true. So
right?
I'm wrong on that one.
That's okay. But no, you're correct, though. They are like, they're companies that just publish IP and comics. Yeah. I mean, maybe Dark Horse has more creative, like they have guys like Mike Mignola doing Hellboy and stuff like that. But most of these big companies are corporate comics. They're trying to create intellectual properties that they can sell for films and TV, toys, video games, everything else. Their whole goal is greed-based. They want to make money off everything that's created. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way it is. And, you know, like I said, they get lucky getting creators that love the characters every once in a while that do amazing work, you know, and you know this, that you know that there's like, oh, when Frank Miller did Daredevil, that was great, you know, or when Kevin Smith did it, or when you know, let's say you know, certain people did Batman, that was the better books. So, you know, that's when corporations get lucky that they hire the right people. But in the long run, you know, you're right. This is they're giant corporations paying thousands of people, paying for their flights, paying for everything. And at the end of the day, when you work for them, you know, you get paid a page rate, and then you get to share 5% of the profit the book makes with the whole creative team after they sell 60,000 copies. Right. So basically what I can tell you is like the top maybe 30 books are the only comics that make a little bit of a royalty. After that, nobody makes royalties. So, and again, they're splitting, you know, a 5 cents on a dollar 4 ways. So there's not much of a future. When you do corporate comics, you do it out of love and a page rate and to build your name up. But once you have your name built up, that's when you should step out and do your own thing.
That's been a running theme in my interviews for this festival so far. It's you build your name up, but there's no money in it. Manage your expectations.
Yes, it's true. When I first started in comics, I had another job. I worked in an advertising agency, and it took me a couple of years before I started making the same kind of money I made in the ad agency with comics. And eventually I quit that and did comics full time. But I realized 2 years in, I better start putting out my own books. And that's when Joe Quesada and I did Ash and Painkiller Jane. And again, right after that, we did Marvel Knights because Marvel was in Chapter 11. We went in and kind of took a chunk of money from them and rebooted a lot of their comics. But it's a constant hustle. It's a front and a side hustle at the same time.
In Event Comics, what were your duties as co-publisher, and what problems and solutions did you encounter running the business side?
So the company was me, Joe, and our friend Laurie Braddock, and it was 3 people. So we self-published books where we never published before. We had to not only make sure we got our work in on time, but it had to be lettered, had to be colored. We had to deal with the printer. We had to deal. We had so many things. We had to solicit. We had to drive up to Wizard Magazine, show them what we're doing, hopefully to get covered. We had a ton of jobs that the three of us did. And believe me, and writing and inking were minor jobs. It was all the other stuff we had to learn to do. And it was a learning process that took us a couple of years to figure out. But when we did, it's something that I've kept doing ever since. But it was that we definitely screwed up here and there once in a while. Sometimes the printing wasn't great. An artist would miss a deadline, and then we'd have to deal with Diamond returning the books. And there was a whole bunch of things we learned along the way. But that's any business. You open any business, you're going to learn from your mistakes. I'll say, being in the business now over 30 years, I kind of made all the mistakes I can. So I'm trying to limit what I do now. And it's funny, with the Kickstarter, I deal with printers, I deal with distributors, mailing. I still find little things, I make mistakes, but our whole life is about fine-tuning ourselves and getting better as we get older. So the joke is, when you're old enough, you'll be great, and then you'll be dead. So
so of course, after event, like, you guys were contracted by Marvel, as you mentioned. It was in Chapter 11. So for everyone who doesn't know what Chapter 11 is, that is bankruptcy. They were bankrupt.
Yeah.
So you guys were contracted to do Marvel Knights, where you rebooted a bunch of their, shall we say, lower tier heroes. It's not the first time Marvel has outsourced. It wasn't the first time Marvel has outsourced characters. A few years before that, they licensed it to Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld for Heroes Reborn. What made Marvel Knights different? What was a different approach? Did they from the start tell you this isn't going to be like Heroes Reborn? Or
yes, they actually, the first thing they said is, we probably paid too much for Heroes Reborn. Those guys did the work, took the money, and that was it. With Marvel Knights, we want you guys to go in and not only reboot these 4 series, but we're going to give you the penthouse of Marvel Comics to work out of. We need you in the building. And they also wanted us to be spokesmen for the company, because back then Stan was not working full time with Marvel. He was like doing his own thing. And they needed somebody to go out and do TV and do press to push the books, because a lot of the books were being canceled. 2 of the titles we were worked on were actually canceled, which was Daredevil and Punisher were canceled right before we got there.
oh, really?
And then we picked Black Panther and Inhumans. We picked the characters we wanted. They didn't want us touching X-Men. They didn't want us touching like Spider-Man. They said, no, you have to take something and make it bigger. So we went for the characters we loved. And so Daredevil, Punisher, Inhumans, Black Panther were 4 groups of characters we loved since we were kids. I loved since I was a kid. So, the basic difference was Heroes Reborn was an in and out deal. They did it and they left. Marvel Knights is they wanted us to stay there and start doing more and more and more. But our initial thing was to do 2 years worth of publishing, to get the numbers up, to get the image of the company up, and to open the door for movie and TV people to come in and pick through the properties.
That's incredible, because, okay, so I think what fans thought was that Daredevil was canceled for Marvel Knights.
No, it was, but Daredevil and Punisher were being canceled. They told us these 2 books are being canceled. And we said, well, we want them. And they're like, well, they're not selling very well. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to make them, big again. But no, they were being canceled. The last story arc for Daredevil was a Scott Lobdell story where Matt can see, he gains his sight. And Punisher was just ending. Punisher that just wasn't selling anymore. They were going to cancel a bunch of stuff because the comics were not, unless they were hitting a certain number, I think it was over 40,000 at the time, they would cancel it when it fell below. And then they would start another X-Men title or something else. But we wanted to grab on to those 2 titles. And then because both Joe and I grew up loving Fantastic Four, Black Panther was introduced in Fantastic Four, and Inhumans was introduced in Fantastic Four. So we grabbed those 2 characters and we just placed the right people with them.
Oh, that's true. They were introduced in that one stretch of Fantastic Four along with
Yes,
Galactus and the Silver
which
Surfer.
which which Joe and I bought when we were kids. So that's why we picked those guys.
It's of course some of the greatest superhero comics of all time.
I agree.
Uh, of course, when you talk about bringing in Hollywood people, so you mentioned Kevin Smith's Daredevil earlier, which is a great looking book, by the way.
Thank you.
Because you inked it. Oh,
Well, and Joe drew
yeah,
it.
and
You
Joe
know,
drew
we
it.
had a great Richard Eisenoff colored it. I mean, we had great
Yeah,
people. Dan Camp. It's just great stuff.
and it was great that because I was a huge Kevin Smith fan, and I was like, oh, Kevin Smith is writing a comic book. I gotta go read it. So, what do you think? Like, what was that strategic, or was it because you guys were friends with Kevin that and you knew that
So
he
we,
wanted to tell a Daredevil story?
so Kevin asked us to do artwork for Mallrats, one of his movies, and then he asked us he wanted the event comics booth for Chasing Amy, the movie Chase. So
Yeah.
we kept seeing Kevin. We brought out the booth, and Joe and I are in Chasing Amy for like 3 seconds in the background. But we were friends, and when the Marvel Knights deal came, we knew that Kevin was a huge Daredevil fan. He's actually a huge Harley Quinn fan too, but he's a huge Daredevil fan. And we thought, well, how cool. We asked him, would you like to write it? And he's like, oh my God, he was very excited, and he was all in. I mean, he tried to back out at one point. But in the end that he did the job. But this was just something exciting for him to do. And he was really nervous because he thought, well, I made films and everything, but if I do a comic, they're going to kill me, And his first love is comics before film. So it was an experiment that worked out really well. And, again, all of Marvel Knights, all the creators were good friends of ours. So we just called in favors and, paid our friends a decent amount of money to work for us.
That's great. It was a really smart decision. It was a really great comic. I will ask you a question about Kevin, which is
Sure.
that in a Wizard magazine promoting Guardian Devil, he did say that he didn't understand Jack Kirby, and you replied with, "I will explain it to you." But nowhere in the interview did it show your explanation. I feel
No,
like
yeah, I do get this because Dan DiDio used to run DC. Dan DiDio, he used to tell me, I don't get why this guy's so popular or that guy's so, and I always have to explain it. So to Kevin, I explain that if you look at Jack Kirby's art, anatomically, it's not correct. It's all over the place. It's chunky fingers and weird lines and all this stuff. But when you pull yourself back, it's dynamic, it's bold, it almost borderlines pop art in a way. And Jack could tell a story. Like there was you would read the pages and follow everything so smoothly. It was not difficult to follow the flow of his stories, but he would do these crazy things where hands would be like this, and he would do all this stuff. And not everybody understood. They'd go, oh, that finger looks weird, or that hand looks weird, or that head looks weird. And I'm like, no, it's not about the individual parts with his art. It's about the whole of the panel or the whole of the cover. He's creating an environment where these lines are alive, and these lines have life to them, and they're bold and they're dynamic, and people are explosive, and they're having normal conversations where their hands are like this. It's his artwork was theatrical. It was bombastic, and it was like 3D in a way. And a lot of people, when they first look at Jack's stuff, they don't like it so much. But you give it enough time and you do a little reading and your brain starts to sink in. It's like, no, this guy was pretty brilliant. He was doing things that nobody ever did before. And a lot of times people who don't understand art have to take a deep breath and get to know what the art is about and what it's doing. Look, people still look at Van Gogh or Picasso and go, I don't see it. Or I could do that. I could throw some lines down. But there's so much more thought to it. And Kevin at the time was just not, he was just liking the art he liked. And everything else was weird or, but we grow older, our tastes change, like in music and in art. And as Kevin got older, and I explained things to him, I think he finally absorbed it.
it's true. I grew up as a kid thinking that if it didn't look like George Perez or John Byrne, it wasn't good art.
Right, right.
And
Yes.
then eventually I was like, oh yeah, this Bill Sienkiewicz guy is really good.
Right, but initially you look at it and it looks like a chicken got paint and started scratching all over the place. But that's the beauty of art, right? That our brains can start growing and appreciating things that we normally couldn't do before. That's a wonderful part about growing up, you know.
Yeah. What was running Marvel Knights like? How much input did you have? How hands-on were you guys when it comes to overseeing the whole line?
We edited every book. So every script came to us, we would give them notes. Every page of art came to us, we could give notes. Every coloring came in, we would do coloring notes. Sometimes we'd go up to the colorists and sit with them and go over stuff. It was two control freaks making comics. We wanted to do the books better than Marvel. So
Yeah.
in order to do that, we had to babysit every part of it. And because our names were on every book, we felt we had to give it our all. So Joe and I, we literally worked up in that office, sometimes 24 hours a day. Like we would crash up there. The president of Marvel Comics had a shower, and he had a room with a bathroom and a shower on the 12th floor that I would use once in a while because I'd pull an all-nighter and I'd go take a shower in the morning so I could start fresh. But those 2 years when we worked together on Marvel Knights, every single book, every single page went through our fingers, and I think it shows because later on when Joe got busy as editor-in-chief and they still did Marvel Knights stuff, it wasn't the same. You know, you can tell when we left. You know, and that's a good thing for me because it feels like I made a stamp. You know, I kind of did something right there.
What was it, a case where you guys would give the creators a brief for what they were going to do, or did they come in with their own proposal and you'd give notes?
So they came in with ideas, and we would try to tell them like, okay, that's good, but we want to try to keep the story like in this kind of flow. Can you work that idea and move it around to here? And or in Kevin's case, can you stop writing 8,000 lines of dialogue and cut it down to a paragraph? There were points when we felt Kevin wrote so much stuff, the characters should almost be like this part of the thing with the word balloons with the whole page. So we had to edit a lot of Kevin's stuff because he was not used to writing for comics. But we would just guide them. They would hit us with ideas, and we'd say, "That's a great idea. That's been done before. Why don't we tweak that a little bit?" We were very hands-on editorial for the whole run.
From a people management standpoint, I know you were friends with Kevin, but at the same time, he was the Hollywood guy on the team.
Yes.
How do I word this? Did you have to dance around so that you didn't hurt his ego?
I one night around, it's the famous story Kevin tells, but I'll tell. He tried to quit the book at one point, and I called him up and cursed at him for like an hour. So I treat him like anybody else. As much as him being a director, he's also a guy I hired, right? So I just was pretty straightforward with him. We knew what not to ask Kevin to do. How's that? There were things where we said, that's like Kevin's not going to want to do that, or we were so happy Kevin was doing TV shows talking about Daredevil that we really couldn't say anything. He was so excited about it. But as far as changes or suggestions, he was always great working wise. He was always open to suggestions and editorial and editing his work. He was always pretty generous with it. He's a really simple, good guy. He's just a straightforward. He is the guy you see on the screen, and when he's just that guy 24/7.
Do you remember when he wanted to quit? Like what point in the book he wanted to quit?
Yeah. So Kevin didn't know that Scott Lobdell did a story about Daredevil gaining his sight. So Kevin's initial idea was about Daredevil gaining his sight. And then when he heard that was already being done for the last issues of the series, he was like, "Oh, that was my story. I got nothing up, blah, 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 blah," And I had to call him up and tell him, sort of yell at him in the nicest way, what kind of writer are you? You know, you just turn a corner and there's another story. And he did. The next day he had Guardian Devil. He came up with Guardian Devil. So sometimes, you know, all of us in life, we need a cheerleader, even if they are cursing at us a little bit. You know, we need a cheerleader. Kevin just needed a cheerleader that night.
You wish Kevin did more comics?
You know, I like his films. I think in a way, he loved doing Green Arrow, obviously. You know, he did a line of his own books. I think he does whatever the hell he wants these days. So would I want more comics from him? Of course, but I also want more movies, and you know, and then I also want him to be happy. So maybe him being happy right now is time with his daughter Harley and his wife, and not doing anything. So you know, for your friends, you want them to be happy first.
Yeah.
As a fan, I would love more comics.
Of course, Marvel Knights ended up being so successful that, you know, Joe Quesada was eventually hired as editor-in-chief. And I think what a lot of people want to know about that particular point in time is, why just Joe?
Because I didn't want that job. So Joe was very interested in being editor-in-chief, and he wanted to run the place. And that was probably the complete opposite thing that I wanted. I wanted to create more original characters. I wanted to do different work. I wanted to pursue more writing. And the idea of taking a corporate job where I wouldn't be able to do that, and I'd have to actually oversee a bunch of people, it just wasn't something I wanted to do. And I've been offered that job at different companies, and it's just never anything I want to do. I'm always flattered, but Joe really wanted it, and Joe was great at it, you know, and up until recently, you know, it was a good run, you know, but it just wasn't the job for me. I wanted to do more comics, and, you know, corporate jobs at a point, they become corporate jobs. It becomes about not the content anymore. It becomes about what's selling, what's not selling. We need to hit this mark. And all of a sudden, you know, the business that we were doing, the creative books we we're doing, all of a sudden, we're getting calls like, it has to sell this much, otherwise we can't do it. And it kind of puts a missile into the creativity when it's about numbers.
I feel that there was a rumor going around at the time, which is, as fans do, make up rumors, that the two of you ended up having a falling out, which is why the two of you ended up splitting up. But that's not true, is it?
I mean, I talk to him every couple of weeks. We still see, when we go to San Diego, we grab dinner and everything. I guess, like, you know, so people make up things so in their minds there's a reason for everything, you know. I guess not doing my own thing wasn't enough reason. We definitely had different opinions on things, but what two friends don't, you know? But no, we've stayed friends over the years, and you know, he just did a cover for one of my books. You know, so I guess that if that rumor works for some people, whatever they want, but we just wanted to do two different jobs, and we've been working together for a long time. So a lot of times, both when you have a team like that, the natural thing is that I want to do this and you want to do that. We should do it. And down the line, if we want to get together and do something again sometime, because we still own characters together.
Yeah.
You know, so but no, I mean, you know, I guess if that works for some people, that's fine too, but that wasn't so much the case, you know.
Yeah. I think a big part of it, and I'm just theorizing here, is I think a lot of fans cannot fathom the idea of someone not wanting to run Marvel Comics.
Oh my God. You know, it is on the list of things I want to do. It's like way down there, because it's like so for me, it's like a lot of responsibility, and I can't work from home. I have to be in an office from 8 in the morning till 12 at night, worrying about 100 books getting out of the deadline. It's just, honestly, we had it on a small level with Marvel Knights, 4 books a month. Imagine 80 books a month plus trade books, and I have to oversee all of them. For what? For what end? For what end? For what does that do for me? That means I have no vacation, no time off. I babysit a million people, and eventually, no matter how nice I am, there's going to be a certain group of people that can't stand me because I'm the boss,
Yeah.
and I have to make decisions. It's just it wasn't the life for me, and Joe was really good at that. He's good at managing all that stuff. It wasn't for me. I've never been a corporate guy. And it's more money, yes, but I'm not money motivated. So I have money. I don't have kids. My wife and I both work. I don't need, it's if money's out of the picture, then is it power? Power over what? I can do something, I still can't write those books. So I'm going to be watching comics go where I'm like, oh, I wish I could write that. And in the end, I want to own something, and I'm not going to be able to own anything at Marvel. When I left Marvel, that's when I started creating all my own characters.
Yeah. So we've talked about you inking, we've talked about you running a line or a division and a company. So let's talk about you writing. What is it about writing that makes it? What is it about writing that that works for you?
It's about telling stories. So, like yourself, probably grew up reading comics, watching movies, watching TV, reading tons of books, and traveling. And when I travel, I always hear stories about a town. And when you travel, there's a million stories, and people have stories. And I love listening to people tell stories. So eventually I started writing. And, with Ash and Painkiller Jane, with Joe, we started coming up with characters, 22 Brides, and all these different characters. And as I was working for Marvel and working for everybody else, I kept keeping notes of characters. This is what kind of character I want to write. Well, one day I'll do a character like this. And it's, for me, it's a two-part thing. One, I get to tell a story I want to tell. Two, I get to work with an artist and see what they bring to it. So when you're writing, there's nothing cooler than when you get the first couple of pages from something you wrote and this artist is just killing it. It's 10 times better than I thought it would be, and there's this excitement to that. And it's really hard to explain, but you're part of a creative process. And, deep down, I want to entertain people. I want people to like what I'm doing and to be engaged and to feel like what they're reading makes a difference. What for them, I mean, Amanda and I had that with Harley Quinn. When we wrote Harley Quinn, all of a sudden, little things we did in the book become these major things in movies, and it changes the character, and Amanda's drawing different outfits on her, and all of a sudden there's a million cosplay. So it's like that kind of thing where the right person on the right character can do amazing things. And I feel like I have a lot of stories to tell. I'm not a filmmaker. I've worked on film, but filmmaking is usually around 100 or 200 people and a lot of money. And comics, I could sit there and I can write 3,000 spaceships fill the sky over Manhattan, and somebody has to draw it, but we don't have a budget of $1 billion to do it. You're just sitting there with a pen and just drawing it. So I love the idea of comics because comics have gazillion-dollar budgets. Like you can just write anything you want. And boy, is that some wild freedom, because I hear screenwriters go, well, I had to change it because I didn't have enough money to do that or do that. I even hear James Cameron say that. Like, we don't have enough money to do this, so we did it that way. And I always laugh because comics have no budget. And so it's fun to write something with no budget.
It's just depending on what the artist is.
Yeah, I mean, I drive some artists crazy, but that's part of my job.
How important do you think it is for an artist to learn how to draw everything?
Well, for a comic book artist, you have to learn how to draw everything. Okay. For any other artist, if you're drawing flowers, then you just need to draw more flowers. With comic books, you have to draw everything and learn everything. Everything from chairs to cars upside down to apartment buildings in 3-point perspective to rocket engines to planes to the bottom of a car to 2 people in a room to backlighting to bird's eye view of things. Anatomy, you have to kind of take it apart in your brain and learn every kind of piece of anatomy, and then you have to learn the shading on every piece of anatomy, and then you have to learn how have people's sort of like people if they're tired, how to just kind of, there's so much you have to draw. If I just look in your room and you, not only do I have to draw you, I have to figure out how your chair works, how your bed is, those 4 pictures on the wall, the Thor hammer in the corner, like all this stuff has to, you know what I mean? And then it has to be done in perspective. So comic artists have to be those artists that draw everything on earth. And even though on some level it's considered lowbrow by other fine artists, it's actually the skill that people have. It's a skill that just, I think it's underrated, and it will always be underrated because people dismiss a simple line as being simpler to do.
Yeah.
But that's not actually the reality of it. The simple line is usually the most skilled person knowing what they're doing. So
yeah, I think I learned that when I started reading Alex Toth stuff, and I thought like, wow, if he makes a mistake, I'm gonna see it immediately.
yeah, and he was, he influenced the generation of artists. So did Joe Kubert, so did Will Eisner. These are the guys that made it look easy. Like, oh, it's easy. I just put a line there and a line there, and then you're like, wait a minute, that line is defining where that guy. Oh, okay, I see what he's doing there. It's really interesting how when you start breaking it down, just how complicated it all is.
We have a question from Kaimi saying, you mentioned this earlier and I was nervous in asking, but anyway, for me as a student, how and where can I find mentors who can help me learn when it comes to comics production?
So, that's the hard part, right? Because conventions are great places to meet artists. And if there's an artist you like, you can always, a lot of them have social media, so you can always reach out and say, hey, would you need an apprentice? Or is there something I can work in, some way I can work in the studio? You have to reach out. Not a lot of people do it because obviously they want people that live near them or they need them in the same place they're working. But you have to fish a little bit. You have to go out there and just say, hey, I'm looking to apprentice. This is where I live. Is there anything I can do, or is there some job I can help you with? And then where maybe you can teach me some skills. It's not easy because not everybody's open to it, but there are people that are.
So how important do you think it is for an aspiring artist to have the communication skills to even ask for that?
So it used to be just stay at home and draw, and then the company sells you stuff, right? But the world now is, this is me. I'm here talking on this show to an audience that may have never looked at my art or don't even know who I am. But so social media and interaction is important on some level. It's important also to have the skills, right? Because a lot of people can talk a big game and then you look at their art and you're like, okay, you're nowhere near it. Or, so I think there's a combination. I think you should have a social media presence. I think communication is very important. Before I did comics, I worked in advertising. So I kind of had that, it was kind of easy to do. But not everybody has that. So part of it is getting out of your shell, is getting out of your safe place. Some people might need therapy to get there. That's okay. You know what I mean? It's good. It's good to talk to somebody and, take those problems, put them in the light and get rid of them, watch them go away. But it is a part of our job. I think when you're the most skilled, when we look at the top 10 artists, they really never have to do any social media. They're just brilliant.
Yeah.
But I think it's everyone in the middle fighting for that place. I think part of it is being able to communicate with them, being able to talk about your work to people, and get people excited about it. And I think having a social media presence is definitely a good thing. If you're an artist, I'd say every day you're drawing, put that camera above you and record your drawing. Even if it's terrible, there's people that'll want to watch it. And so there's a lot of different ways to do it right now.
Jimmy, your wife, of course, is Amanda Connor, who's a great artist. Nobody draws like her. You've worked on Jonah Hex with people like J.H. Williams. Nobody draws like him. Darwin Cook, nobody draws like him. How, and I think those people end up selling themselves. How, what is the value of having a style and an aesthetic that you can't just replace? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, and if we talk about all those people, their influences were from other places. You look at Darwin, you can see Alex Toth, you can see animation, like Bruce Timm, you see animation background. With Amanda too, Amanda always says Chuck Jones is one of her inspirations, like the Bugs Bunny Warner Brothers cartoons, right? So you see where they're inspired from, and yet they do something completely new. But you can't exist by trying to get your artwork to look different. Initially, your artwork should be, it should communicate what the storytelling is, and then style eventually takes over. Eventually, you see how things are done, and style starts sneaking into your work. But initially, you should learn how to draw everything and not worry about style, because if you go for style, then you're going to look like Darwin, or you're going to look like Amanda, but you're not going to be them. So, my thing is always learn how to draw first, then you can get abstract. If you look at the most famous abstract painters in the world, all their early art is all realistic, photorealistic, and then they were able to expand. Van Gogh, like Picasso, you look at his early drawings, they're all of people and really tight renderings and stuff. And then as he got older, the style started to grow and expand. And I think initially, people need to learn how to draw everything, and then the style eventually will start kicking in as the deadlines start kicking in.
To that point, I think, one of the artists who gets a bad rap in general is Rob Liefeld. But I think a huge part of that is because he has so many imitators, and none
Right.
of them are Rob Liefeld.
There was a lot of Rob Liefeld type guys in the 90s, right? There was a
Yeah.
lot of guys that copied Rob, but there's only one Rob. And I think the appeal of Rob's style was that it looked pretty, and it was big, and it was exciting and shiny, and it had all these things. It also felt approachable. Like, I can draw like Rob, let me try to draw like Rob. And I think when art looks approachable, a lot of people tend to copy it. There's not a ton of people copying Adam Hughes, because that's really tough to do.
Yeah.
And Amanda is another one that they don't really too many people copying her, because you can mess it up so easily. But I think Rob grabbed onto this style where he grabbed a little bit of Arthur Adams, he grabbed a little bit of Jim Lee, he grabbed a little bit of, and he created his own thing. And whether you like it or not, it's still his own style. I look at a piece, I know it's Rob right away. I don't diss him like other people do, because he really loves his work and he puts the work into it. And like food, it's like, if you like something and I don't, I'm okay with it existing. It's okay.
It's funny whenever I hear people say like, "Oh, he should improve his art." It's like, why should he?
I think in a way, his later work looks better. So I think he is improving it. I just don't think the haters are looking that close.
Were you able, an anonymous attendee asks, were you able to draw everything yourself? If so, where else did you learn other than apprenticeship?
So, the exercise, I went to art school. I went to the High School of Art and Design, and I went to New York Tech College, which I took advertising at. And we used to do these exercises where the teacher would put a chair in front of the room, and we do 5-minute sketches. He would move the chair, we'd turn it upside down, and we did it for a whole week. I had a stack of paper this high of that chair in every pose you can think of. Insane, right? But I can draw that chair right now in any pose, because my brain absorbed it. And that's how it is with anatomy, right? So you draw models, you draw people. I always tell people, get a ream of paper and then freeze frame a movie and just draw people fighting, people walking, cars, buildings, sketch them. Put a little time of 5 minutes, just sketch 5 minutes. Doesn't matter how finished it is. Bing, thing stops, put the paper aside, take another piece of paper, draw something else. It's sort of like a sport. You have to practice and practice and practice. You have to look at body language, you have to look at lighting, you have to look at perspective. But it's a matter of practice. And I think it was Joe Kubert who says you have to draw like a couple of 100 pages of comics before you get one good comic.
Oh, wow.
In a way. Now, most people would jump off a building if they had to do a couple of 100 pages. But what Joe was trying to say is practice, 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 practice. Eventually, it's going to become easier for you, and it's not going to be a big chore after a while once you learn.
There's that talk in recent years about studies saying that you need 10,000 hours of practice before you're actually good at something. So it sounds very similar. Speaking
Yeah, I
of,
mean,
yeah, okay.
yeah, go ahead. Now, I was going to say, some people are just great out of the gate. We meet these people once in a while, like they're young and they're amazing, and you're like, where did they get that? Is it the DNA? Is it, I don't know where they got. Joe Cubitt's two kids, Adam and Andy, are amazing artists.
Andy's
it's
kid
just,
Emma.
yeah. Oh, Emma too. Yeah, they're all of them. So, who knows? But for the regular person, yes, you need to practice like crazy.
Alex Ross, when I saw like the way he used to draw when he was 16, I was like, he looks exactly like George Perez. That's insane. Speaking of artists who get a bad rap, Wincy Ong asks, "What is your opinion on tracing?" And then he names an artist. I'm not going to name that artist, but yeah.
So tracing is the art of art to you stick a piece of paper. What do I think of tracing? I think it's like anybody with no talent can trace, right? Hopefully, tracing isn't a thing, right? I mean, it's not really. It's an interesting. Tracing is good if you're going to learn line weights or what a person's doing. When I used to ink, I used to put tracing paper over a comic and try to match the brush strokes, and so I can learn the tool. But I can't make a living tracing. I mean, that doesn't really make any sense.
And then Joshua Joseph Ferolino asks, "Any advice on how to draw for practice?"
Well, practicing. I guess practicing I would say the focus of your practicing should be the things you avoid drawing when you're relaxed. So all of us draw this head we like to draw, or we like to draw this guy like that, but some of us don't want to draw the hands, some of us don't want to draw the feet, some of them don't want to draw shoes. I would say draw the hands and draw the feet first. Practice on the things you can't draw and work on them a lot, because the things you can draw, you drew already. So move on. It's great when you're in school and your friends love you do these 3 or 4 drawings and they love it. But if you want to be a professional, you have to draw the things you don't want to draw. So if we look at the logo of your show, you have to draw a Vesper, you have to draw a balloon, you have to draw a whale. It may not be things you want to draw, but that's part of comics, is you learn to draw everything. So I would say out of the gate, name the 10 things you hate to draw the most and draw them for a month.
Oh, wow. Why is it so hard to draw hands?
Because people look at them as very complicated structures, when in the reality, it's almost a circle with 5 sticks sticking out of it. So if we look at it in the form, it's a circle, a stick, circle, 5 sticks. Now, when we bend the hands, okay, we're all of a sudden 3 joints, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? My thing is, hands are just repetition. You have to always have a mirror in front of your drawing board, because you can always do this, you can do that, you can do that. Get that camera out on your phone, take pictures of your hand, and just draw it. It's just a simple thing you can learn to draw after a while. You look at what I'm doing with my hand, it's like every pose in a comic, right? Boom, hand like that way, the guy's like this, like that, on the phone, so just keep doing that, and eventually the mystery's gone. You start to learn, this is the longer finger, the thumb sticks out this way, it doesn't go the other way, your pinky is shorter. When you make a fist, you want to close it but have the knuckles forward. If you're a real fighter like that, if you're a superhero like that, they don't have to be complicated. It's just a matter of drawing and repetition. Then you take all the mystery away from it. And once the mystery's gone, the hand's easy. Then get to the feet, then get to the hips, then get to the neck. And, but it's because, like you just said, why are hands so hard to draw? Because your brain is saying hands are hard to draw. Oh. So we need to kick that out of your brain and say hands are easy to draw. Let me just draw 7,000 of them in every pose, holding a bottle. Let me freeze frame TV and draw it, guy holding a bottle or holding a glass. Eventually, you take the mystery out of it. And when you take the mystery out of it, it's easier to do. But it's repetition, repetition, repetition.
How do you get rid of writer's block?
So when I sit down to write a comic, I type. But when I write a story, I'm doing other things. I walk, I ride, I take my bike, I go up, I think about the story all day. When I sit down, it's time to type what I gathered, the information I gathered. So when I hit writer's block, I tend to do something else. Go to a movie, take a walk, talk to my friends, call a neighbor, hang out, eat lunch, go out to eat. It's because if I just think about how am I going to get this story, where am I going to get this story, your brain doesn't work like that. Your brain looks at a problem because writing is different than a leaky pipe. You look at a leaky pipe, you say, I have to turn off the water, I have to find out where the leak is, I have to fix the leak, and then I turn back the water. Okay, here's a story. I need a story. It's not like a leaky pipe. You have to just say, you have to, I personally don't get writer's block. What I do is I try to get a better story. So I have a story and I go, how can I make it better? How can I make it better? So I tend to keep busy. A lot of times I take a nap, like a 20-minute nap. It really helps me. I know it's like an old man trick, but honestly, like a 20-minute nap does the trick.
If people need a reason to take naps, there we go.
I think when you take a nap, you're not fully sleeping. You're not 100% sleeping. And the problem that you're trying to work out in the story sits there on some level. And I think your subconscious tries to do the opposite of your waking thing. So it kind of messes with stuff. But when you wake up, it gives you a little fresher approach to your problem, I think.
Is there such a thing as artist's block?
Yes, because artists are trying to tell a story as clear as they can. And sometimes they'll get a challenge with a script. And no matter what they put down, it's not working. It doesn't read right, or it doesn't move right. Or amateur writers have one panel and they have 3 actions going on. And the artist is like, I can't have the guy on the phone cooking eggs and talking to his mother at the same time. I can't do, how am I supposed to do that? So artists do have issues with that. And what they do is they try to dissect the page a little more, add more panels, multi-panels. They don't follow the script to the T where it says panel 1, 2, and 3. They'll go panel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 instead to make it work for them. But again, when you draw a comic page, it is a constant problem solver. You're trying to communicate the clearest way you can what's happening on a panel, and that is part of the art form.
Do you write full script or do you work Marvel style?
I don't believe in Marvel style because I like to work full script because I like my artists to see the acting on the faces of the characters. So if there's dialogue between the two and somebody should be upset or somebody should be happy, what happens with Marvel style is you're guessing on the page and then the writer has to make it fit, even if it doesn't work that way. Full script, I'm giving the artist more information. I'm saying, Daredevil right now is looking over the city, but he's upset. He's really deep in thought. And then he hears something, a noise, and he starts laughing. Well, if it was full script, it would be writing it differently, and I might not have those beats. And I'm like Tarantino in a way. I love my dialogue. I love when characters speak, and I like them to say something. So I want to have the panel just right for that. So that's why I do full script.
Do you also do full script when you're writing for Amanda, considering you could just tell her?
I do, but she changes. She changes it. She looks at it and goes, there's a better way of doing this, and she messes with it. And that's okay. I wrote 3 issues of Jonah Hex for Darwin Cook with Justin Gray. And no matter what I wrote, he still did his own thing, and it was always better. So, I just, there's a point where you're like, J.H. Williams, like when I gave him the script and Jonah Hex, I never said put these borders with these crows. And then I get the pages and I'm like, oh my God, this is so much better than I ever imagined it. Like, this is just, it's art. And I'm like, thank you, JH, for making me look so good.
That's what great artists do, right? Like, so like as a writer, is it a skill to step back and let your artist just do their thing?
It comes down to respecting the artist and also feeling like you have the confidence in them, like you've worked with them or you know they're really good. If it was a brand new artist, I tend to overwrite because I'm trying, because I don't know what they're going to do for me. So I tend to write bigger descriptions or break down the panels more. But if I'm working with Darwin or if I'm working with Bill Sienkiewicz or Amanda, I know I can go in and no matter what I do, they're going to make it a little better. They're going to do their own thing. I would say with established artists, you can write less, and with inexperienced artists, you have to write a little more. You have to give them a little more.
I'm now very curious because I know you're a huge Silver Age Marvel fan. What do you think of the dynamic between Stan and Jack, or Stan and Steve? Because
Yeah, I think Jack. I think Stan was an idea guy, and he would go in there and tell them. He would knock it down to a page, and if you look at the old pages of Kirby and some of the guys, they'd have little pencil writing like this page. This is what happens on this page. They'd literally break up that one page Marvel style script Stan gave them. But you got to remember, Steve and Jack were writers as well, so they were both writers, and then those guys were artists as well, right? So
yeah,
they did like double duty. Where Stan, let's be honest, Stan was running the company and writing every comic. How the hell do you do that? You know, but he did it, and he had good collaborators. So Stan's whole job was finding guys like Steve and like Stan, like Jack, and like John Romita Senior, and because he knew no matter what he wrote, those guys were going to break it up and make it better.
yeah,
So it was definitely a confidence call with all that.
yeah. Because I think in recent years, a lot of fans are trying to say that Stan didn't do anything, and I'm like, if I had Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, I would step back too.
No, Stan did plenty. So did Jack. So did Steve. You know, the fans like to create these battles and fights and all this kind of stuff. But you know, Stan had an ego job, right? So his job was motivated on three different things, right? He wanted to have a successful company. He wanted to create a universe of characters, and he wanted the artists to do what he wanted. But there was a point where he was still the boss, so he gave them stories and they ran with it, and everything was a collaboration. They all collaborated together, and that's the reality. Is all those books were collaborations, and all the books you see now, a lot of them are collaborations. No one person is more important than the other. You need all of them to make it work.
Right. Like, I think the best thing those three ever did was when they were together. So
I agree. Let's be honest. Stan wrote a bunch of comics in the later on in life, and it just wasn't the same because he didn't have the creators that he had back then.
I agree. We have a question from an anonymous attendee asking, do you still have time to practice and learn new techniques even with your busy schedule?
I do. I sit here. I don't know if you caught me at times. I'm just like drawing while I'm sitting there. I kind of doodle when I draw. When I'm not doing anything, I draw all the time. I try out new pens. It's like I this is a brand new one I'm trying out. I'm constantly doing stuff. And as far as writing, I'm less of a reader now, and I'm more of a traveler. So I travel a lot, and I get a lot of information that way by experiencing things. I have problems reading books when I'm writing 2 or 3 comics. I can't keep track of everything, you know? So I tend to not read as much, but I tend to live a little more. And I forgot what was the question. I told, oh, do I have time to new things? I'm always looking at new things. I mean, during COVID, I learned how to use Procreate to color Amanda's covers. So that was a new thing.
Another anonymous attendee asks, how do you write good dialogue? That's something I struggle with when I'm making comics.
Okay, well, editing is the best part of dialogue, meaning put down what you want to say, and then you go back and edit it. You go, so you and I are speaking to each other, and I'm selecting words as I'm going. You're right now, you're backing up what the next question might be or how you want to decipher what I'm saying. So dialogue is like we look at it like, does what I'm saying move the story forward? or define who the person is. At the same time, with each character, what do they want and what do they fear? If we know these two things, then we know how to answer. So if I say, hey, you want to go skydiving? And the other character goes, and the other character now is the other character, a bold person. Yes, let's do it. Or are they scared? You know what? No way. Or are they, this character doesn't really want people to know what they're thinking. So it's like, well, when the time comes, we'll see. There's many ways of looking at dialogue, and the dialogue has to match the person, because a lot of amateurs or a lot of beginners, all the people sound like them. But the characters need to sound differently. So a lot of times I assign certain characters to people I know or I met, because I know that how they would answer it would be completely different than the way I answer it. So it's a part of writing is being able to really be a good listener. So even your own mother or your grandmother or your aunt speaks nothing like you. You ask two of you the same question, she'll go off on a tangent that you never would. And that's the difference. That's the difference that defines her, because she'll say, oh, I would never, So it's very important to be a good listener, because you can pick up things in dialogue, and you pick up the way people speak, and the way people avoid things too is very interesting. Like how we avoid conversations, how we don't want to show weaknesses. So our dialogue, what we say, sort of skirts around things. It's very interesting, but part of that is listening to dialogue. And again, if you're writing a script and you just need to get what's going on down to move the script along, you go back when you're done, take a day, go back and read your dialogue and say, is there a better way of saying this that this character would say it in the way the character? Thor would not sound like Spider-Man. No. Thor has a confidence, Spider-Man doesn't, right? So these answers are going to be defined about who they are. So in your writing, you have to pick and choose who these people are and how they would react. And again, I like to state, when I'm writing characters and creating them, I always write these two things. What do they want? What is this character's motivation and goal? What do they fear? What are they afraid? Are they afraid they're going to lose somebody? Are they going to afraid? What do they fear? Our fears define us in some way. And so does, and it's to understand that is to get a better understanding of your character. And then eventually in your dialogue, you realize that character doesn't talk that much because he's reserved. And this character is a nervous wreck. So keeps talking and talking and talking and talking, because he doesn't want to have to deal with what people are saying. These are things you learn over time. Just have a big dinner with your family, man. You'd be surprised what you can pick up.
So on a very concrete example and something that you worked on, how does a Generation X man like you convincingly write a character like Harley Quinn?
So, the easy thing about Harley Quinn is when Bruce Timm and Paul Dini created the character, they said she was from Brooklyn, and I grew up in Brooklyn, New York.
So you find a similarity.
Quite a similarity. So I understood the multitasking of the brain, because I grew up with three brothers. My dad, my mom, and my aunts and uncle lived in the same house. I understood being able to multitask. I understood how I had wish fulfillment half of my life. So, we all have that. I'm driving, somebody cuts you off, you wish you had a bazooka and could blow up their car. You can't really do that, but I kind of understood the character and where she came from. And I also watched the cartoons that Paul Dini and Bruce Timm did, and understood, I know why people love this character. I don't want to take that away when I'm writing her, but I also need her to move away from this abusive relationship, because I don't want to write a comic about the Joker beating up on Harley all the time. And when we took over the book, we decided, let's write Harley the way we see her now, in the world that's going on now, being aware of the world around us. And, I may be Generation X, but my brain is, I am a tech guy. I love new tech. I watch new shows. I stay focused on the world that's happening today, and I don't sit in the past too much.
That's great.
And if you pay attention to the day, to the world today, it's just different. things move in a certain different way. And if you can reflect that in the dialogue and the stories, then the books are for all generations. Again, it comes down to editing.
Harley's a unique example because Harley was actually created because of the actress Arlene Sorkin, who sadly
Yes.
passed away last week.
Yes.
When writing her, did you feel the need to adhere or move away from Arlene Sorkin's voice, or was that not a factor at all?
It's not the actual sound of the voice. It was what Paul Dini and Bruce Timm set up. And they set up a very intelligent woman who had trouble with her impulses. As much as she was focused, she would tend to run towards her impulse of something's bothering me, I must do something about it right now. Very impulsive. And we were writing a solo book, so this wasn't Harley Quinn and the Birds of Prey. This wasn't Batman. This was just Harley. And part of that was getting to know who she is and getting her out of her environment, because we took her right out of Gotham right away, and then giving her own supporting characters, because up until then, she's just been a supporting character of the Batman universe. So we needed to get her out of there. And so a lot of it was just studying what people liked about the character. And then Amanda and I had the process why we like her. What are the traits that we find enduring part of her, and why does the deadly part come out? What provokes it? So we did a deep dive into her character, and a lot of it had to do with therapy and the way people think and the way people deal with things. And so the first 2 or 3 years of that book was us pretty much putting Harley on the couch in the book and figuring out what makes her tick. And we got lucky because the things we hit on were happening in the world at the time. And all of a sudden the character blew up because of a couple of ideas we had that were different than what Bruce and Paul brought to the table. And this is a case of, and it only happens in comics every once in a while, the right team on the right book at the right time. The Frank Miller Daredevil with Klaus Janson, right team on the right book. We all have runs. Walt Simonson on Thor, the right team on the right book. Every couple of years, this happens on a title or two, and it goes crazy. And we got super lucky with Harley. Amanda and I, because Amanda and I wrote it together, we tried to one-up each other with the craziness in the story. And I think that was a very contagious, very, we hit, all of a sudden we had comics that teenage girls were buying with their moms and reading together. And we never saw that audience in the conventions too much, awesome. So yeah, we hit on something. This Gen Xer, I mean, I was born in 61. It's a million years ago, I know. But I grew up with a lot of different generations. But again, I get back to my point is I'm a very today guy. I read the news. I'm doing everything, every new thing I'm trying, my wall of technology, thank God you can't see it. But from my VR helmets to my iPads, it's like I try everything. I want to keep up with everything. And I think that helps the craft a bit.
What do you think it is about Harley that resonates so much with today's
wish fulfillment? Audience? It's wish fulfillment. Harley does the stuff you can't do. In the first issue, we have a guy dragging a dog, and she attacks the guy for treating the dog crappy. Harley, not only sees a homeless person, but sits with them, feeds them, and tries to find them a home. It's wish fulfillment. We wish we had the time. We wish our empathy levels were that high. We wish we could pull out a bazooka and blow up the car in front of us. We wish, Harley's a Power Girl fan. We're Power Girl fans. Like, she does the things that we think she does. And she also loves her friends and her supporting characters. And of course, anybody that loves the people around them so much, we find very endearing. And we make a connection with them. So
Someone asks, I love the point you made about apprenticeships and how important connections and community are. Can you talk more about your experience in the industry compared to your experience in the comics community? I'm not exactly sure how to read that question.
All right, I'm guessing they're trying to say, like, so in my comics community, you mean with my other creators, where we have a different language because we discuss the work we're doing, or the companies, how they're screwing us all the time, or we have these discussions about how to make things better for ourselves. The comic community, as a rule, I don't put down anybody's love for anything because I don't care. I'm happy when people like things. If they don't like things, if I don't like things, I don't spend time trying to make people understand that. It's a waste of time. It's like me trying to tell you, no, you don't like pizza. And you're like going to me, no, I love pizza. I'm like, no, let me tell you why. I don't do that, right? If somebody loves something, I'm like, that's great. I love that they love something. I try not to do negative stuff. Even my social media for Twitter and for Instagram, I speak to people respectfully. If they come at me in a different way, that's on them. But my language to the fans, I communicate with the fans. My Kickstarters, I pretty much talk to everybody that backs the Kickstarter. They have a direct line to talk to me, ask questions, and I'm always there for them. And my social media is important because people tell me what they like and don't like, and I listen to the why. If you notice on Twitter, if you guys follow me on Twitter, it's my name, so it's pretty easy to follow. But I put polls all the time where I have people voting on things because I'm trying to get a sense of where people's brains are with certain things. Because what the news and the press says is in order to get you to keep watching the news. So they want to give you negatives. But the reality is people are really good. And people one-on-one are fantastic. And people in this hobby are smart. People that love comics, animation, they're really smart social people within their community where they feel safe. And people tend to underestimate us because we love cartoons or we love comics or whatever. But I don't see sports any different. I don't see, I'm not a big fan of politics because politics, all they try to do is polarize us.
Yeah.
And, and TV, let's be honest, news stations, they used to be news, now they're opinions. So it used to be the building is on fire on 48th Street. That's the news. Firemen are there fighting the blaze. But when they go, okay, we're going to talk to Bob, who was once in a fire. What's going on at that fire, Bob? Well, I'm not in the building, but when I was in a fire, this happened. And you're like, that's not news anymore. That's opinions. So so how I try to communicate with the fans is if they ask me a question, I answer it honestly. If I see something wrong, I try to correct it politely. And that's just, and then just be a good person. That's a real simple rule.
What if in the process of finalizing a script, you get an idea that sounds really good and you could in fact, you want to fit it into the script, but it requires a lot of rewriting. Is it still worth it to try it out or just stick with the original and keep that idea on the back burner for later?
So if a deadline is looming and you have to get it in and you don't have the time, but if I come up with a good idea, I always stop everything and I work it in. Because let me tell you, if it fits in there, then it fits in there. And it just means your brain isn't done telling that story yet. You're turning a corner and seeing another perspective, and you're realizing, oh, there's a better way. Oh, you know what? At the end, I could just go back to what I did in the beginning so I can bookend it. Oh, let me do that and change things. Believe me, I've rewritten scripts right before they went out because I found a better way of telling it. Don't be lazy. Your comic might be the first one or the last one somebody reads. So don't be lazy.
When you do that, when you're writing for yourself, do you self-impose a deadline?
I do. I give myself a deadline, and I usually blow it, but I give myself a deadline. On a calendar, I have a 5-year calendar that's in front of me, and nobody's gonna like this. It's paper, sorry, but it's 5 years, and I give myself goals all the time, 2 years in advance, 3 years in advance. I also say make sure I cancel this thing in 8 months, and I mark it on my calendar like a crazy person.
Your free trials and stuff.
Yes, all the time, right? But I tend to be very stick to a routine. So if I'm going to do a book, I like to give myself 2 to 3 weeks, and I try to get it done in that.
Wincy Ong asks, what country gave you the best travel experience? Does traveling inspire your creativity?
It does inspire my creativity. I wish I was more traveled, but I would say definitely every time I go somewhere with a different language, it makes my brain have to readjust and rework. It's sort of like switching from PC to Mac.
Mm-hmm.
So when I go to Spain, I have to speak Spanish. When I go to Italy, I have to speak Italian. Germany, if I go to South America, Portuguese. I try to learn a language right before, just enough to speak. So all these things are requirements. Now, whether I'm good at it, I do my best. But I find that people appreciate that I'm trying.
Yeah.
And when I travel, if I'm going to stay someplace a day or two, eventually I will buy a book, because every town you go to and every city you go to, there's a book about stories of the city. I have tons of books on that, because the more you read, there's a million stories in those books that people have never told. And you can tweak them and turn them around and take it and make it into something your own. And that's what inspires me.
I can really relate to that, because even when I go to the States, I obviously speak English, but even when I go to the States, it's I have to think of certain words that only apply to the Philippines, don't really apply. It's a strange slight rewiring of the brain.
But it's
Kaimi
good.
asks, yeah,
Go
go
ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Kaimi asks, based on your experience from beginning as an artist and writer to being a professional at both, what were the hardest things to draw and write, and how were you able to overcome that? Additionally, what was the most interesting knowledge you found as an artist and a writer?
So early on, I learned that there is a certain percentage of people that give up. And I found that my persistence, meaning I grew up in a place that I won't say I was poor, but I was pretty close to poor, where I always had to work for everything I got. And on the flip side of that, I appreciated every little thing I got too. I've never had excess in my life. It's always been, if I want that, I have to work this much to get it, and that's okay. But I learned there's a lot of people that quit. And I always say those people are like the stepping stones for me. They quit, they fall down, and I walk over them towards the goal. So I'm persistent with what I want. So I've had a lot of things fail over the years. In a career, you only hear about the things that do well, right? But when you're the person, you sit there and you dwell on relationships that didn't go well, books that didn't sell, things that got canceled, things out of your control. 2 creators just don't like you for some reason. 2 editors just don't like you. Never even met them. There's things out of your control. I'm persistent. So a lot of times when I get struck down with things, I tend to come back twice as hard. I try to push. I feel like I always have something to prove, even though it's ridiculous. But I don't think it's a bad thing to have in your system, in your wiring. So I learned to keep after things and, just be persistent and go. When I was breaking into Marvel, I kept doing samples. Every 2 weeks, I kept bringing in new samples. Every 2 weeks, a whole bunch more. Until finally I don't know if they couldn't stand me anymore. They just wanted, or I finally got better. But I stayed persistent. It took me years to break in, but I did. And now that I'm in, I realize I still have to fight for every little gig. There's still, all of a sudden you can work for a company and everybody changes hands, and now you have people who don't even consider you anything, and you have to reintroduce yourself again. So it's a constant battle to get the things you want. But boy, oh boy, when they do and when they work, it's so satisfying. So I would just say, keep your eyes on the prize, be persistent, let others quit, stay with it. And remember, in the beginning, you might have to have 2 jobs. and do comics on the side. It's okay. That doesn't mean you're not successful. That just means you're smart. That means you know you have to pay rent and eat. But it's all part of the process, and hopefully eventually it all pays off.
Jimmy, I'm mindful of the time. I just wanted to ask you to plug yourself. What are you working on now, whether it's for paper films or
Yeah,
whatever
so
else?
right now I'm writing a new book for Todd McFarlane. It's a new gunslinger series,
Gunslinger
and it's
Spawn.
set in the 1800s. Yeah, it's in the Spawn. It's a Spawn book, and it's set in the 1800s. It'll probably come out, I'm going to say March or April next year. I'm writing it now. Todd never has a late book, so you have to get a bunch done ahead of time. I'm working on that monthly. I also have, I'm working on a film, which I can't really talk about and now everything's on strike, so that's on hold. But I'm working on a small sci-fi film that I wrote and actually co-wrote with a friend of mine. And then I do Kickstarters. I have a website. If you go to it, it's paperfilms.com. And there's a pop-up when you go to the page, and if you just fill in the pop-up, once a month I send an email with artwork and what we're doing and where we're traveling to. It's kind of a fun thing. I do not fill your mailbox. It's like once, twice a month tops. But paper film is my main thing, and I'm doing Kickstarters. My next Kickstarter starts in a couple of weeks. It's a book called The Hunters, and it's about a husband and wife set in the Old West. And it's a pretty crazy book. It's drawn by Chad Hardin, who did Harley Quinn, fantastic artist. And with the Kickstarters I always offer it digital. So if you're in the Philippines and you want to get the book, it's like $6 or $7 US dollars, but you get a file sent right to your email, and you could enjoy the book. I always tell people, because regular mail is so expensive these days, I kind of like digital comics myself. Even though I love holding the book, digital comics make sense when you're going around the world. And I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram under my name. It's pretty easy to find. You found me, so anybody can find me, right?
Shipping's so horrible.
It's
Jimmy,
horrible.
when you and I connected, because throughout the course of this conversation, we have brought up a lot of times about things that fans assume, things that fans put together, rumors that happen. You and I got together because I said something on my show about Darwin Cook that you immediately told me was wrong, and I was like, oh, so I was wrong on that one.
Yeah.
What is it about comic book fandom and the behind the scenes stuff that you think just makes fans like me and whoever else just want to fill in the blanks for some reason?
I guess because a lot of stuff isn't said. The creators, we don't think we're that interesting that people would want to worry about our daily lives or anything. We think mostly people want to know about the work and read the work. But in reality, I'm one of those guys too. I'm like the artists I like, I want to know everything about. And I realized that. And when you were writing it, because Darwin Cook and Amanda both worked on their after Watchmen, before Watchmen books here at the house. So of course I saw everything going on. But I think that we like to have a fantasy view of how the world is. It's a lot more interesting. Plus, I don't think, we're not celebrities, right? Like comic people, we're really not, outside of comic convention, we're not really celebrities. It's very rare somebody recognizes me. It's once in a while I'm in a bar and all of a sudden there's a drink in front of me and it's a guy down at the end and he's a big fan and he comes over and says hi. But we're not celebrities. So we don't have a channel where, let's be honest, like Tom Cruise, if he falls down a flight of stairs, it's on every news station in the world, But like with us, I don't think people have the fascination. I don't think I'm that interesting, that somebody would want to report on our day-to-day stuff. But I do think on some level it would be fun to write a book about the behind the scenes of a lot of the things I've done. I just always say I have to wait till 90% of them are dead, though, before I can write some of this stuff, because not all of it's great. but I understand from a fan's point of view, because earlier we talked about Alfredo Alcala, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know a lot about him. I know he's from the Philippines. I knew he came in the early 70s and he just kicked ass everywhere he went. And then one day he was gone. Like I didn't see his artwork anymore. And that's a shame, right? Because I should be able to know the life of him and what he did and all this stuff. And we see it happen all the time where comic people pass away. And then like one day everybody's like, oh, he was great. And then the next day back to work. And, you know, but if it's a celebrity, you know, they're still talking about Michael Jackson 20 years later,
Yes.
you know? So it's a different world. I don't know if it's good or bad. I kind of like that I'm not famous because I can go to the supermarket and I can get drunk with my friends and, you know, throw up in a toilet in the bar and, you know, nobody's really reporting on it.
The one Alfredo Alcala story I know is that he was able to draw 80 pages a week, which is crazy.
You mean draw a pencil then? You pencil 80 pages?
Pencil and ink, 80 pages a week.
I mean, let's break that down. That's like 12 pages or 11, 12 pages a day. Like that's insane.
Yeah, and I asked his son about it, and he said he actually saw it in action. Oh, okay. That's crazy.
I mean, you got to think why did he have to do so much for that week? But that was comics back then. In the 70s, the guys, you literally had you were a comic book artist and you had your comic book wife. And your comic book wife would do everything that you needed to do so you could stay on that table and finish that deadline. You know, we don't have that anymore. Like the world changed. We don't have that. My wife's working upstairs. I'm down here. I don't have anybody help. Sometimes I'm hungry. I'm like, God, I wish I had a butler. Just bring me lunch, you know? But the world isn't like that. But I remember Jack Kirby, I think Roz would fix his meals, would do everything for him so he would never leave that drawing board. But that's not a life either, right? Because part of me wishes Jack Kirby got out more, was celebrated more in his life. So, you know.
My very last question is a question I ask everyone, which is, why do you love comics?
I love them because they're mine. I love them because I grew up when there was no iPhones and there was no computers and there was no 800 channels on my TV. And I would sit in my room and I would read a comic and it was mine, and I would read it at whatever pace I wanted. I would sometimes sit there and look at a panel for an hour because dissecting the drawings, or I'd read the comic through and I'd read it again. But it was entertainment where I controlled the pace of it. And visually it was exciting, and story-wise it was exciting, and it was tactile. I could hold it and I could smell the paper, and it was my comic. I put it on my shelf. I remember I had 3 brothers, so everything was everywhere. I had my own comics. So I fell in love with the gazillion-dollar budgets of comics. You know, I fell in love with the possibility of other worlds. I fell in love with the idea and the teachings of what's good and what's bad, and how crime doesn't pay, and how bad things happen to bad people. And I fell in love with the values, and I fell in love with the idea of storytelling, where somebody can tell a story using just drawings. I found that amazing. And it's never gone away from me since. Like yourself, I collect original artwork because I can see your stuff on your back wall. I see the Prometheus piece. I see CC Beck over there.
That's George Perez, Captain Marvel.
Oh, it's George Perez?
Yeah.
And what's is that a
that one? That is a Bill Sienkiewicz Promethea.
You see, I can see it from here.
I was like, I want, because I was able to commission Bill for something, and I was like, I want to give him something he's never drawn. So, and I think
and little known fact, real quick, Amanda was the model for Electra Assassin.
Yeah,
you know, a lot of people don't know that she used to be Bill's assistant, and their 2 styles could not be any different from each other.
I know when I found that out, I was like, I have never connected those 2 people ever in my life until this moment.
Nope. But when you see them together, you get it. They're like old friends. They love each other's work. But no, so I fell in love with the art. I fell in love with the storytelling. And again, I felt when I grew up, I had, certain books spoke to me. Like I had the characters I liked, and I felt like that they were mine. I felt like that was my universe and my thing. And a lot of people weren't reading comics when I was a kid, so it was kind of a really just a cool world that I never really fully left.
Mr. Jimmy Palmiotti, thank you so much for joining us. This was a great
Uh,
interview.
My pleasure, buddy. It's so great to be here. Hope everybody has a great day. I know it's early in the morning, so get out there and have some fun.